As of yesterday, April 19th, every American is now eligible for the coronavirus vaccine within the age ranges approved for each vaccine. That's 18 plus for the Moderna vaccine, 18 plus for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, paused but expected to be resumed as soon as Friday, possibly, and 16 plus for the Pfizer vaccine. This was originally going to sort of be sometime this summer for full eligibility. Then Joe Biden announced it would be May 1st. Then Joe Biden announced in March that it would be pushed up to April 19th. And we are there. And it really couldn't come at a better time for two different reasons, at least two different reasons. First of all, in some states, demand is slackening for vaccines. States with more Republicans, 43% of whom do not plan to get this vaccine, have more vaccine hesitancy. And so they are starting to see, in some sense, more supply than demand. And so opening vaccination eligibility to more people will hopefully boost vaccination numbers and keep going with vaccinating, 3 to 4 million people per day. Secondly, because of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine being paused, vaccine numbers have been slightly declining, and we want to keep things going. The U.S. is still averaging a very strong 3.19, just short of 3.2 million vaccine doses per day. And we want to grow that number. And thirdly, expanding eligibility to all adults and then 16 plus for the Pfizer vaccine is important because we are really in a race against variants, which some countries are winning, and we want to get there too. There is a lot of doom and gloom about the variants, nothing works. It's just a disaster. If you look at cases and deaths in the UK, the source of the British B117 variant, cases are now down to 96 per day. That's not 96 per capita. It's just 96 cases per day. That is down. I'm sorry. The cases are down 96% from their peak in mid-January. If you look at Israel, another highly vaccinated country, cases are now down more than 98%. And these are countries with many variants when you look at a country like Israel. And in Israel, it's been all vaccination. They are around 56% fully vaccinated. Around 50% cases started to fall off a cliff and go close to zero. In the UK, the vaccination has been more modest, but the guidelines have been significant. And the UK is actually only 15% fully vaccinated, but at 50% partial. And that is absolutely huge as well. In the US right now, we are at 25% fully vaccinated and 40% partially as of a few days ago. Numbers probably a little bit better by now. Based on that, we are probably, if we can keep this going, 30 or so days. Remember, 2 weeks ago, we said it was probably 35 to 45 days. We are probably about 30 days from significant improvements here, but people need to get vaccinated. And now with full eligibility, hopefully that will happen. My 17-year-old sister got her first dose this week. Just about everybody I know has had one dose already. Things are moving in the right direction. Now, sadly, one poll says it's 20%, another says it's 30%. At least 20% of the country simply doesn't want the vaccine. And most of them are Republicans. 43% of Republicans, as we talked about last week and I mentioned earlier, do not want the vaccine. And that's a major problem. Now, over time, with more and more colleges saying, if you want to come back to campus, you need a vaccine, more and more venues and businesses and even foreign countries saying, if tourists want to come here, they will need to be vaccinated. Hopefully, these numbers will improve. Just get your vaccine. Don't lose sleep over the MAGA clowns for now. 80% is still enough for herd immunity. Let's do what we can now and then deal with the people who selfishly will not get vaccinated due to ignorance, due to disdain, due to political misunderstandings, due to conspiracism, whatever the case may be. Let's keep going. We have potentially authorization coming for multiple vaccines for the 12 to 15 and 12 to 17 age ranges for the respective vaccines, tests being done to look at expanding it even further. So all of this is going in the right direction for now. I mean, listen, I've said before, I get it. It's frustrating to see people who could get vaccinated and who say, I'm not going to, and they could spread it and then they could give it to somebody who's not able to get the vaccine or who is in the 5% that by odds don't develop immunity. and then some of those people will die. Like, I get it, but let's focus on what we can control. And now that we have full vaccine eligibility, you can get vaccinated. That's the most important thing. And we're going to continue following what happens with J&J and what happens with vaccine hesitancy and the whole thing. Yesterday, we saw closing statements in the Derek Chauvin trial in Minnesota. This is the trial of the police officer who killed George Floyd in the case that last summer catalyzed nationwide protests. We may soon know the verdict, but in the meantime, it's even conceivable by the time we publish this clip, we will know the verdict, although it doesn't seem to be moving quite so quickly. But in the meantime, what we know for sure is that Derek Chauvin's lawyer, Eric Nelson, gave a completely deranged and delusional closing statement that in a sense actually felt Trumpian. In the way that Trump pushed the presidency to new lows, Eric Nelson pushed legal defense to new lows with this ridiculous closing statement. Here is Eric Nelson saying that there are elements of criminal trials that are like chocolate chip cookies. Yes, take a look.
A criminal case is kind of like baking chocolate chip cookies. You have to have the necessary ingredients. You've got to have flour and sugar and butter and chocolate chips and whatever else goes into those chocolate chip cookies. If you have all of the ingredients, you can make chocolate chip cookies. But if you're missing any one single ingredient, you can't make chocolate chip cookies. It's a simple kind of analogy. But the criminal law works the same way. We say we call the ingredients the elements. The state has the burden of proving each and every element beyond a reasonable doubt.
Not only is it bizarre, it's also wrong. Like, you can make chocolate chip cookies often without any one ingredient. You might think, well, I definitely need flour. No, you can use flour alternatives. Well, okay, but I need eggs. No, you can use applesauce as an emulsifier instead of eggs. Okay, but butter I definitely need. No, you can replace butter with any number of lubricating elements, oils of different kinds. It's just a very dumb analogy. But sadly, it may be one that is fine-tuned to what Eric Nelson perceives to be the level of the jury. We just don't know. That's the scary part. This may actually work. I've talked before about my jury duty experience on an assault case. And the most infuriating part was nobody, I don't want to say nobody, almost no one in the jury room even understood what it was we were adjudicating. It was a question of, was a physical altercation self-defense by the accused? And by self-defense, we don't mean, backyard bar rules of what constitutes self-defense. We were supposed to adjudicate this case on the basis of the judge's instructions as to what legally self-defense is. Did it meet the required legal elements for self-defense? And the conversation in the jury room among everybody other than myself and one other juror was a colloquial discussion of, no, come on, this was self-defense. Well, but hold on a second. At the time I lived in Massachusetts, what is Massachusetts law about a right to retreat? Anyway, the point was, on something that simple, 2/3 of the jurors didn't even understand the law meant to be adjudicated. I'm not hugely optimistic about any particular jury. I know nothing about the Derek Chauvin case jury, but based on my experience, I'm skeptical. Here's another portion of the closing where Eric Nelson says, if you were talking, you were breathing. Therefore, since George Floyd was saying I can't breathe, it means his breathing is fine, which has already been debunked by Dr. Martin Tobin, a pulmonologist who testified during the case. Take a look.
It's true. If you are talking, you are breathing. It doesn't mean effectively. And Dr. Tobin described how even medical doctors have problems sometimes assessing the legitimacy of a patient's needs relevant to their respiratory processes because they're saying, I can't breathe. And some doctors confuse it for just anxiety or this or that. So if medical doctors make these mistakes, Dr. Tobin told you it provides a false sense of security, right? Lieutenant Mercil told you that that is what is said among police officers. He's the trainer. So how many times do we hear an officer say, based on his training and experience, if you can breathe, you can talk. If you can talk, you can breathe. Excuse me.
And then Nelson goes directly from this into the claim that very often people in custody will fake a medical emergency to avoid going to prison. Now, this seems particularly bogus since George Floyd really did die. Is the argument that because other people have faked medical emergencies, Derek Chauvin did nothing wrong in his handling of Floyd? I think that's what he's trying to imply, at least. Take a look at this video.
A reasonable police officer will take into consideration, again, his training, his experience, right? Lieutenant Mercil talked about, and many people talked about, many of the officers talked about how it is not uncommon for suspects to feign or pretend to have a medical emergency to avoid being arrested. Unfortunately, that is the reality. Nobody likes to get arrested, and reasonable police officers know that.
You know, these hypotheticals for me aren't doing much, but it's possible that they're doing something for the jury. We just don't know yet. And then lastly, here's Derek Chauvin's attorney, Eric Nelson, saying, listen, Derek Chauvin could have kicked George Floyd. He could have punched George Floyd. He could have elbowed George Floyd, but he didn't. Almost like the argument is he deserves an award because he didn't kill and elbow George Floyd. He merely killed him. And I guess that's to be looked up to. Take a look.
Officer Chauvin made a decision not to use higher levels of force when he would have been authorized to do that, including punches, kicks, elbows, right? All of these tools were available to Officer Chauvin. That is not an intent to purposefully use unlawful force.
All right. And then actually, the very last one. Here is Eric Nelson saying, listen, George Floyd being put face down, that can't be a problem because people do really nice things face down. Sometimes people sleep face down. Sometimes people suntan face down. So therefore, being face down can't possibly be part of this case.
We've heard a lot about the prone position. Consider just the basic prone position. People sleep in the prone position. People suntan in the prone position. People get massages in the prone position. The prone position in and of itself is not an inherently dangerous act. It is not an inherently dangerous act.
So this is the idea, and this is a common legal strategy. Take each piece and say that's not a problem. Prone position isn't a problem by itself. Knee to the neck isn't a problem by itself. Plus, you know, Derek Chauvin didn't punch George Floyd. He didn't elbow George Floyd. But the point is, altogether, it is a big deal. Everything together killed George Floyd, period. And that is what is ultimately being adjudicated here. I really couldn't tell you how this is going to end up. We're left to wait. There is tension in Minnesota in advance of the verdict, concerns about unrest. And to be clear, Derek Chauvin is innocent until proven guilty. Don't send me the voicemails about, oh, David, you're looking to hang this guy. First of all, I'm against the death penalty. I'm not looking to hang anybody. And of course, Derek Chauvin is innocent until proven guilty. He deserves competent defense counsel like everyone else, full stop. There's no qualifier. The closing statement just happens to be nonsense, but that doesn't mean it will not work. Maybe Eric Nelson is a moron, but maybe Eric Nelson accurately has assessed what will appeal to this jury. And that may be the chocolate chip cookie analogy. We will know when we get the verdict. Let me know what you expect. You can find me on Twitter at @dpakman. The number one funding source for the David Pakman Show has been and continues to be membership. And membership is not just a feel-good thing. You get access to the world-famous bonus show every single day just for members, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show day in and day out. You can sign up for membership very, very quickly at joinpakman.com. That's joinpakman.com. If the normal prices strike you as high, by all means, use the coupon code BETTER21, all one word, all lowercase. Become a member today. Remember that the David Pakman Show depends on the support of viewers and listeners just like you. You might think they're different, but they're not. They're really just like you. You can sign up at joinpakman.com. You can use a coupon code for a discount if you prefer. That code is BETTER21. Donald Trump resurfaced yesterday on Fox News' Sean Hannity program and told many of the same corrosive lies that he's been telling about the 2020 election since November. And why wouldn't we expect that? Trump was still telling the same corrosive and debunked lies about the 2016 election as recently as January. If Trump still hasn't accepted the results of the 2016 election, why on earth would we expect him to accept the results of the 2020 election? Everything about this interview is hilarious. Here is Sean Hannity introducing it. Sean Hannity framing this as a major exclusive. But if you're watching, you will see Trump doesn't even seem pleased to be sitting for this interview.
So tonight, for the hour, we welcome the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. Mr. President, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Sean.
All right.
Okay, so now they get into what we could call the substance, although there wasn't very much substance. And here Trump jumps right into provable, debunkable, easily disprovable lies that in presidential re-elections, presidents tend to get fewer votes in their re-election than in their first election. It's just not true. We're going to look at the numbers, but watch Trump use the lie to somehow, I guess, continue making the case that Joe Biden didn't really win.
Many other things. The big thing is taxes, low taxes.
Low taxes.
You're going to have the biggest tax increase you've ever seen. Pro-life, Second Amendment, so many different things.
Now, I hate to cut in already. The tax increase Joe Biden is looking at would not be the biggest in history. Trump did barely a thing on abortion. Trump did nothing on the Second Amendment. OK, let's go to the core of it, though.
Look, we got 75 million votes. It's more than any sitting president in history by far. The word was if we got 65 to 66. We got 63 the first time and won. If you got 65 to 66, there was no way you lost. We got more votes. We got 12 million more votes than we got. And it's never happened to another president. I don't know if you know, Sean, usually in a second term, a president gets less votes. I got 12 million more. It's the biggest that's ever happened in history, from 63 to 75. Never happened before. And all of these things are good. These are popular things. But more important than popular, they're great things for this country. They're going to rip apart your Second Amendment.
Now, first of all, it is fewer votes, not less votes, Mr. President. But let's not start the grammar policing. I know he only went to Wharton. But what Trump says is not true. Trump says presidents typically get fewer votes in their re-elections. Check out the numbers. Obama did get fewer votes. He lost 4 million votes from 2008 to 2012. But George W. Bush gained 12 million votes in his re-election. Bill Clinton gained 3 million votes. Ronald Reagan gained 11 million votes. Richard Nixon gained 16 million votes. And Dwight D. Eisenhower gained 1 million votes. So really, other than Barack Obama, you have to go back to World War II for a president whose votes declined after their first term. And it's kind of a weird example. It's an exception to the rule. It's FDR, who had 4 terms and whose presidency in so many ways was the exception to the rule. Maybe what Trump means is Obama got fewer votes in the second term. And we know Trump is obsessed with Barack Obama. Maybe that's all that this is really about, but an easily disprovable lie from Donald Trump. Check out this suck up question from Sean Hannity. It's not even really a question. It's like a gushing statement of praise, the likes of which you'd expect from North Korean television. Sort of like a, Mr. President, can you confirm how hard you're working?
All right. So I know a lot of people that are around you every day. This is what they're all telling me. You are working as hard as you did when you were in the White House, except you play a little golf more. That you're keeping an insane schedule, 7 days a week. You really don't stop.
Well, we're seeing a lot of people. We're seeing a lot of good Republicans and a lot of good Americans, in some cases, great Americans. And
Hannity is doing the equivalent of Kim Jong-un bowled for the first time today, and he bowled the 300. He also turned water into wine. This apparently counts as an interview on Fox News. Now, I told you yesterday that the Treasury Department put out a report confirming coordination between Donald Trump's 2016 campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, and a Russian intelligence officer, Konstantin Kilimnik. The topic of Russia came up, and Trump says something completely unintelligible, but he does do the sir routine, where he claims someone came to me and they said, sir, take a look at this.
If you did run and did win, what would you do differently?
When I came in, we were hit with phony Russia investigations. It was a total phony deal.
That was 3 years of your
No,
presidency.
I've been fighting off investigations for 5 years. I mean, really, since almost the day that we came down, and they were corrupt, Democrat-inspired. I still have it. They were Democrat-inspired investigations. Russia. I remember, Sean, and I don't have too much time, I guess, with you, but a story, I think it's interesting. I haven't told it before. During the campaign in 2016, I'd be asked, like by one of our aides, "Sir, do you have anything to do with Russia?" I say, no. That would be it. Then a month later, somebody would say, "What do you know about Russia?" I said, "No, what? I don't know what you're talking about." Okay, I wouldn't think of it. Then after 3 or 4 or 5 times, people would say, "Do you know anything about Russia?" I kept saying, "Huh." So after 3 or 4 times, I said, "What's going on with Russia?" They created a phony deal. It was paid for by crooked Hillary
They
Clinton.
made a phony Russian disinformation dossier.
Destroyed.
And they used it to spy on you as a candidate,
Correct.
your transition team, and while you were president. It says at the top of a FISA warrant, verified. It was unverifiable, and they knew it.
17 times.
They knew it right from the get-go.
I don't know what either of them are talking about, but they seem to be kind of playing off of each other and winding each other up. Here's a few more seconds from this portion of the interview.
They knew it, they were warned beforehand, and they knew it certainly from Christopher Steele and the subsource by January.
It was a total fraud.
Yeah.
And you know what it did? It hurt any possibility of dealing with Russia. We could have had a good look. They'll say, "Oh, he loves Russia." Getting along with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing. Getting along with China is a good thing. The problem we have.
Now, when Trump was asked whether he will run again, this just like he can't answer any question normally. He said that from a legal standpoint, he doesn't really want to talk about that.
I say this. I am looking at it very seriously, beyond seriously. From a legal standpoint, I don't want to really talk about it yet. It's a little too soon.
If you did run.
What does that even mean from a legal standpoint? Like, part of me thinks it has to do with Trump wanting to use donations as a slush fund for his personal expenses. I don't know why my mind goes to that, but like, what could he even mean from a legal standpoint? And then Trump was also asked about Republican vaccine hesitancy, and Trump said he doesn't really know why Republicans are hesitant to take the vaccine for COVID. Take a look.
You know, they all want me to do a commercial because a lot of our people don't want to take vaccine. You know, I don't know what that is exactly. Republican, I don't know what it is.
You encourage people to get it.
I encourage them to take it. I do. But they want me to make a
Did you get it?
Yes, I did. I had it and I took it, okay?
You got both.
Because I believe. So here's the thing. They want me to do a commercial.
Trump can't imagine why Republicans wouldn't be getting the vaccine. Because for a year, Trump said this wasn't serious. If something's not serious, why would anybody need a vaccine? That's why there's so much vaccine hesitancy. So just a completely bizarre interview and unclear what the point of it is. I guess Sean Hannity wants ratings and Trump wants attention. Like, maybe it's that simple and we don't need to analyze the motivations more deeply, but expect much more of this if Donald Trump's QAnon congressional allies get reelected in 2022. Trump will be reinvigorated. You're going to see this much more regularly, and it may be what gets Donald Trump to run in 2024, as we've talked about before. So very important that we ensure Trump doesn't get his people, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, Madison Cawthorn, the Jim Jordan, you know, whoever, anybody that can be removed in 2022 will make it less likely that Trump even runs in 2024. Let's talk about virtue signaling. The right says that they are against so-called virtue signaling. Now, virtue signaling is when you publicly express an opinion to try to signal that you are morally on the right side of something, or to signal that your character is to be respected. And Republican Arizona Governor Doug Ducey is doing exactly this. He has issued an executive order banning so-called vaccine passports, of which there are none in Arizona, nor were any coming, as described by his executive order. First question, What is a vaccine passport? Well, the executive order would ban state and local governments in Arizona from requiring Arizonans to provide proof of COVID vaccination, either to go into some kind of government building or to receive something. He tweeted about it saying, quote, I've issued an executive order banning vaccine passports and preventing state and local governments from requiring Arizonans to provide their COVID-19 vaccination status to receive service or enter an area. Ducey going on to tweet that, quote, the residents of our state should not be required by the government to share their private medical information. More on that later. While we strongly recommend all Arizonans get the vaccine, it's not mandated in our state and it never will be. Now, the logical question would be, was the state of Arizona about to mandate people need to get vaccinated? Was the state of Arizona or were municipalities about to say you need a vaccine in order to go to this government building or that or whatever? No, nobody. This was never going to happen. So first of all, this executive order is focused on something which wasn't actually going to be taking place. Now, second question is, does this actually apply to those who might require a vaccination, like a school or a business? It does not. It would not prevent that. If the Phoenix Suns NBA team says, you know, at some point, once, you know, maybe by next season, to come to our games, you're going to need to provide proof of vaccination. This executive order does nothing to stop that. The Phoenix Suns could legally do that if they want to do it. Schools can require vaccinations. Schools have required vaccinations for decades in Arizona, just for different vaccines. And so not only is this virtue signaling trash executive order meant to stop something which was not going to happen, which is mandatory vaccination per Arizona, or governments, municipalities requiring the vaccine or requiring it to do something. That was never going to happen. This is going to create anti-vaxxers who will have heard of this, and then they will go to a business or their kid will need a vaccine to go to school, and they will show up and film themselves saying, Ducey passed a law against this. And of course, he didn't. The executive order is about what government will or won't do with regard to vaccination. It has nothing to do with businesses. It has nothing to do with schools. So it's a combination of pointless virtue signaling with the addition of creating more problems for schools and businesses who are able to require a coronavirus vaccination. Now, a related topic. In that second tweet, Ducey said residents of our state should not be required by the government to share their private medical information. Now, is he on the same page with that claim when it comes to which bathroom a trans person wants to use? Or does he want it to be forced that they need to provide proof of their biological sex at birth? Is he on the same page when it comes to women and abortion? Or does the phrase residents of our state should not be required by the government to share private medical information only apply to COVID vaccination requirements? This guy is pathetic, one of the worst, one of the worst handlings in the country of the coronavirus pandemic. And now the executive order, which doesn't actually deal with what people think it deals with and deals only with something that was never going to happen. We're going to have more coverage of so-called vaccine mandate conspiracism on our Instagram page at David Pakman Show. And if you want to see, one of our Dutch viewers yesterday in a supermarket saw an advertisement for beer, and it looked like I was on the advertisement. It's actually really strange. I posted it to my Instagram. You can find me at david.pakman. The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them. It's my pleasure to welcome to the program today Joseph Westphal, who's a senior fellow at the Wharton Leadership Program at the University of Pennsylvania, also former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, David, glad to be with you. And by the way, I'm a professor at the Lauder Institute at Wharton.
Okay. an important detail.
We get credit for that.
So when it comes to, we've talked for a long time about the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia, and I think that there's sometimes a simple understanding, which is there's a goal for shared stability in the region, often in connection with oil prices and the oil industry. Is it quite that simple, or how would you explain the history of the relationship?
No, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. And the one thing you have to remember about Saudi Arabia is that U.S. public opinion, that is the average American, in Gallup polls after Gallup polls from the 1930s to today, to the latest polls, see Saudi Arabia in unfavorable terms. A majority of Americans think of Saudi Arabia in unfavorable ways.
Yes.
And that reflects back to the attitude that members of Congress then have to have because they get pressure from constituents. Some of that is because there's no knowledge. Saudi Arabia was closed until recently to the world. So Americans haven't traveled there. They haven't seen the country. They haven't visited, although many Saudis have come to the United States to study and to work here. So I think that lack of knowledge and that unfavorable rating play a big role. The other thing is, of course, that it is the birthplace of Islam. So you cannot ignore a country that hosts millions of people every year for religious services, and it has the kind of influence that they have around the world and have had for a long time. In addition to the fact that the region, or not just for oil, but for trade and also for big nation, powerful nations, China, Russia, and others, has become a very important region where we're all competing.
Over the last, I don't know how many years. I mean, we can talk about the last 5 years, but it's really sort of been seeded earlier than that. There has been much made publicly of what seems to be a kind of liberalization in some sense in Saudi Arabia, arguably, at least to some degree, because of the direction that Mohammed bin Salman wants to see the country go. But at the same time, while publicly, we're hearing about women can now drive and some of these other things, we know about the sequestering of dozens of officials in a hotel in order to interrogate and sometimes make threats, and even much, much worse. So as from a diplomatic perspective, when one thing is happening publicly and yet very different things are happening privately, what are the conversations like between American diplomats and the leaders of the country? Do they talk about what's happening behind the scenes as much as they talk about what's happening publicly?
Well, it depends on which diplomats you're talking about.
Okay.
And that's a really, really good question, because diplomacy really changed dramatically after the Obama administration. So when I left in 2017, in January, at the end of the Obama administration, none of the things you pointed out had happened. Mohammed bin Nayef was still the crown prince. I had excellent meetings with him, the king, and Mohammed bin Salman upon leaving. We had a great relationship. We worked on everything from their economic transformation plan, which MBS had put forth. We worked on security issues with Mohammed bin Nayef. We had a great relationship, extensive relationship, trying to deal with all of the regional issues in Syria, Iraq, and of course, Yemen. We were fully engaged as an embassy in almost every aspect of the relationship, or every aspect of their economy, education, energy, you name it, transportation, etc. We were involved. When I left in 2017, President Trump did not appoint an ambassador for 2 years.
Right.
And so the only diplomacy that was going on was between Pompeo, Secretary Pompeo, who would occasionally travel there, and Kushner. So the embassy was not empowered to work any of these issues, and didn't have access. And of course, after I left, about a month or two after I left, MBS was able to get his father to depose MBN, Mohammed bin Nayef,
Right.
as crown prince, and he was named the crown prince. And then all the things that you mentioned started to happen. So I think, to answer your question briefly, and let me give you a chance to ask some more, diplomacy is critical, but you've got to be engaged holistically.
Now, when you were there, certainly you were aware, and there was this history of the public executions and so on and so forth. Does that get swept under the rug during diplomatic conversations about, for example, Yemen, or is that present in the room?
It did not get swept under by us.
Mm.
From President Obama to the Secretary of State Kerry to myself, and I'll just use myself as an example. Some ambassadors in some countries, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, others, would publicly criticize and publicly, be very negative about some of these practices early on when I first got there. I chose a different method. I chose the idea that we needed to help them make the right decisions, but not going public with them in order to have access and confidence from them in us, that we weren't going to, So I had the conversations with the king, with the crown prince, with the deputy crown prince about lashings, about beheadings, about executions, public executions, about the role of the Matawa, the religious police, who were increasingly becoming a real problem for them and especially for everybody else. And I was afraid that they were going to start, perhaps at some point, have attacking our foreign diplomats. So I was very straight with them that we weren't going to tolerate any of this stuff. It had to change. And it had to change because our relationship was so important.
Now, how do they react? I mean, do they write it off as, well, we just do things differently here than you do in the United States? Or are they aware of how those practices are seen around the world?
Yes, absolutely. They especially MBS was then very keen on knowing what foreign press was saying about Saudi Arabia, about him, about their practices. So they were very well aware of that, and very well aware that our ability to support his plans for the economy, for transformation, for modernizing the country, depended on eliminating those ancient practices that he didn't agree with.
Right.
And were tolerated because there was still a very conservative element within Saudi Arabia's people who, I don't know if they demanded that, but they expected that. So when I went to talk to them about it, they got it and they took action, and they eliminated all those things. Matawa went back to their precincts. The lashings were terminated, and the president was saying the same thing in meetings with the king whenever he would come. He did 4 trips to Saudi Arabia. I was present at 3 of them. One was before I became ambassador.
Now, from much of what I've read, it's unclear. Well, I'll put it a different way. From what I've read, it's not clear to me whether the reasons that Mohammed bin Salman is taking these positions of, the reforms that you talked about and that I talked about, if it's because this is really what he believes, or rather it's because they seem to recognize that the oil industry may not be the best place to be solely focused in the future. There's this idea of diversifying the Saudi sovereign wealth fund. They need to be playing nice with London and New York and so on and so forth. And that it's really, just more of a strategic and financial decision. Like, what makes you think that Mohammed bin Salman really thinks these aren't good practices?
Well, when I was ambassador, he took some trips to the United States.
Yeah.
And in those trips, he met with everybody. He went to California. He met with the tech people. He met with Facebook people. He met with Bloomberg. He met with dozens of people across the board. I got him. I wanted them to do their big their big investment in through the their IPO through the New York Stock Exchange. So I
Right.
got a meeting at the New York Stock Exchange, and it was clear that he was trying to build support for his economic transformation plan. And he wanted the United States involved. He wanted the United States engaged. President Obama actually met with him and had him over at the White House for a meeting. So things I thought things were going very well.
And
I
you
think
thought it was a genuine desire to reform, not just a
Absolutely.
financial incentive.
No, I'm convinced it was. The way I started with him was when I first got there, the king, Salman, was the crown prince at the
Right,
time.
right.
The king was Abdullah, who was also a great guy, and I really enjoyed working with him. But King Salman was the crown prince, and he's the one that I principally worked with because he was the sort of the prime minister. And I noticed his son sitting in a couple of meetings far off in the corner, not participating. And so I asked for a meeting with him, and we met. And from that first meeting where we just got to know each other, I realized two things. One, this young man is someday going to be the king of Saudi Arabia. Number one. Number two, because he's ambitious, and he has always been interested in the political and economic development of his country from the time he was a young man. How do I know that? Because I did some background work on him, so I saw it. His other brothers were not necessarily of the same vein, but he was. And that's why his father loved him so much, because his father was a consummate politician and his son was like him. And so we developed a great friendship. And the friendship was, tell each other the truth. I will tell you exactly what I think. I represent the president and my country, and I will tell you exactly what I think. And I expect you not to be polite back. If you don't agree with me, if you're not going to do what I ask you to do, then just tell me, and then we'll negotiate further. And that's the way we worked for the 3 years I was there.
In the sort of limited time we have left, the Jamal Khashoggi murder, I'm curious your thoughts on how the Trump administration responded to that. Initially, Donald Trump kind of saying, I don't know, I just spoke to the king and they say they weren't involved. I believe them. I don't know. Seems pretty reasonable. And then, of course, the more we learned about it, the more we learned about how at the very close to the very top, if not at the very top, they seem to have known exactly what was going on. How do you think that was handled by the Trump administration?
I don't think it was handled well at all. And I think that in some ways they should have done to some extent what President Biden is doing now, saying, we're not gonna cut. We can't prove without any doubt that he ordered this. He has publicly said he didn't, that this was a rogue operation. But whatever we know, whatever we understand from it, we're going to have to recalibrate, as President Biden has put it, this relationship. And he didn't do that. There was no real diplomacy going on. There was no effort to really end this war in Yemen in an aggressive way. There was no effort to tone down the ambitions of the Crown Prince. And his ambitions are some of them are personal for his own power and influence,
right?
But many of them are also for his country. And we needed to be sure that we can offset the influence that other countries like China would begin to have. Instead, Trump was focusing only on the sale of military hardware.
Yes.
And I thought that was absolutely wrong.
We've been speaking with former U.S. Ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Joseph Westphal. I so appreciate your time today, and this will certainly be an issue we will continue discussing.
Wonderful to be with you, David. Thank you very much.
The David Pakman Show is now on Instagram at David Pakman Show. You can check out behind-the-scenes pictures, memes, shots of the studio, shots of what Pat does all day. Very, very concerning to a lot of people All of that and more on the David Pakman Show Instagram account at David Pakman Show. I've been very careful when we've been talking about George W. Bush during the Donald Trump era not to participate in the rehabilitation of George W. Bush's image. And this is one of the dangers of not talking about former presidents, which we discussed a few weeks ago, which is they end up being allowed either implicitly or explicitly to sort of rewrite their own history and legacy as presidents of the United States. In George W. Bush's case, his legacy is not taking the 9/11 threat seriously enough to start with. More importantly, reacting to the 9/11 attacks by invading a country that didn't do it, the country of Iraq, declaring mission accomplished years early, staying in a total quagmire of a situation while hemorrhaging money and blowing up the deficit, all to get us nothing while committing war crimes. That's a bad legacy. And I haven't even mentioned the Bush administration's response to Hurricane Katrina, which is another complete and total fiasco. And yes, at the same time, as an individual compared to Donald Trump, Bush is less wacky. He's less obviously unhinged. He sounds more reasonable. He seems to relate to people just on an individual level in a more normal way than Donald Trump. But George W. Bush has partially rehabbed his image by becoming friends with Michelle Obama and by being friends with Ellen DeGeneres and painting portraits of veterans. And now he's sort of like a friendly, older past president who just wants everybody to get along. So the point is, I've been careful when we say, wow, even George W. Bush realizes that this thing Trump did or that thing Trump did is terrible, to understand the context of the horrible legacy of George W. Bush. Now, that gets us to this morning. This morning, George W. Bush appeared on the Today Show, and he actually laid out a pretty cogent case against the direction of the modern Republican Party since Bush left office through the Obama administration and during Donald Trump's one-term presidency. And he is completely correct. He arguably doesn't even go far enough. Let's listen, and then we'll talk about it.
I would describe it as isolationist, protectionist, and to a certain extent, nativist.
You disappointed?
Well, it's not exactly my vision, but you know what? I'm just an old guy they put out to pasture, so just a simple painter.
The simple painter.
So let's take this in pieces. I mean, first of all, is what George W. Bush is saying correct? It is correct. The Republican Party has gone, since Bush left, more fully to the, I don't even know that I'd call it isolationism and protectionism. I'd call it nationalism. And yes, nativism. And even nativism doesn't really go far enough. It's really more, it's almost like a xenophobia that's very popular in white nationalist circles. It goes beyond nativist. So Bush is right, and he probably doesn't go far enough. Now, it is true, or better said, is it true that this is not Bush's vision for the party, as he says, and that it wasn't Bush's vision when he was president? Well, yes, sort of, but the truth is more complicated. It's not the Republican Party has now gone nativist, xenophobe, and Bush wasn't at all that when he was president of the United States. The reality is that Bush's GOP was maybe more indifferent to the nativism, and they played coy with the nativism. And while they were less cartoonishly talking about it in the way Trump did, they allowed it, and they even had many people that were part of the administration that were very much of that mindset. Bush personally, is Bush personally a nativist xenophobe, like what he now criticizes about the Republican Party? Probably not. I don't really know, but it's sort of like, is Trump personally anti-Semitic? We talked before. Well, Trump has a Jewish daughter by conversion, Ivanka, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Trump has Jewish grandkids and all this stuff. Doesn't really matter. Trump coalesced the anti-Semites, so his personal view isn't super relevant to me. Whatever George W. Bush's personal view of the nativist xenophobic wing of the Republican Party is, Bush's presidency certainly didn't call out that wing of the Republican Party, and it allowed that wing to grow into what it became during Obama and ultimately led to Donald Trump. So with all of these issues, it's more complicated than what Bush believes, and it's more nuanced than Bush wasn't at all on the isolationist nativist GOP side. It's more like Bush probably calculated that the Republican Party was going in that direction, even if it wasn't his thing. He found a way to placate that wing without being as cartoonishly welcoming of it as Donald Trump was. So what this gets us to is like, how should we react when George W. Bush criticizes Trump and now is criticizing the modern Republican Party? Is Bush a hero for calling it out, or is he a foe who's pretending not to have been a part of it? Neither. Life is more complicated. It's not always black and white. The reaction for me is Bush was a disaster, but even Bush realizes that the Republican Party since him and under Trump is an even bigger disaster, but he's also partially responsible for it. They all are, right? I mean, you know what, the right during the civil rights era, into the Vietnam era, into Reagan, into Gingrich, and then so on into Bush, right? I mean, it's all part of what got that party to what it is today. And you don't have to praise George W. Bush to realize that, but you can also recognize the role that he either implicitly or explicitly or by negligence had in getting the party to where it is today. That being said, I wonder how much of the modern Republican electorate, which is mostly behind Donald Trump, cares what George W. Bush says at this point in time. I don't know the answer to that. Remains to be seen. Very interesting news on the cannabis front. The House of Representatives yesterday passed a law which would allow banks to provide services to cannabis companies in states where it is legal, which is a significant step towards removing what is a real barrier to the development of this industry nationally. As we've talked about before, there has been a major issue within the cannabis space where even if it is legal, and by legal, it could be recreationally legal, recreationally decriminalized, but medically legal. And so that's what the pot shops essentially are selling. Whatever the case, if you have to deal in cash because banks aren't allowed to work with you, that is a major problem. It's a security problem because people know you have so much cash around. It's a problem in a lot of different ways. Lawmakers voted 321 to 101, which means Democrats, but also some Republicans, to approve the bill and send it to the Senate. It is unclear what is going to happen in the Senate, but we know that banks have been generally not willing to do business with companies that are in this business because they could be running afoul of federal laws. Now, I'm aware because I have friends in the industry, in Arizona, in Massachusetts, and some other states. They've told me that there are credit unions that operate only within one state that seem more willing to work with cannabis dispensaries and other businesses, and they feel relatively comfortable that the government is not going to go after them. I don't know whether that's actually true or not. I don't know if that's a false sense of security, but this is a really important thing. Now, where you get to a conflict is the banking industry wants this. And why do they want it? Well, because it'll be hugely profitable. And there is a contingent of people who are sort of stuck between what is seemingly a rock and a hard place for them, where they want cannabis legalization, but they really are skeptical of the banking industry. So if the banking industry wants something, their reflexive reaction is to be against it. Listen, banks are going to make money with this. Banks are going to make money with anything that is, whether it's IPOs of companies that shouldn't be IPOing or holding money for arms deals. Banks are going to make money regardless. The question is, do we want to further legitimize this as an industry so that we can get away from spending tax money, imprisoning people who either use, have, or sell marijuana, and rather collect tax money from this as a regulated industry and be able to use that tax money for public health initiatives, for education, for whatever the case may be? I'm of the mindset of, I don't want my tax money going to imprison people involved in cannabis. I want to see my tax money bolstered, for lack of a better term, by tax money from a legal and regulated cannabis industry. My position is clear. The positions of the United States as a country are moving more and more in that direction. This is a big deal. I don't yet know whether we can expect it to pass the Senate. We will see. We have a voicemail number where you can reach me at 219-2-DAVID-P. I also am launching, I mentioned yesterday that we are new on this platform called BitClout. You can find me there at davidpakman.com/BitClout. What are going to be my top 20 holders are going to have a system to directly message me on the platform, and I will write you back. So I am actually establishing a system. If you don't like the voicemail, if you don't like being like some of our trolls, leaving 10, 12 voicemails a night into the void, follow me on BitClout at davidpakman.com/BitClout. My top 20 coin holders will have a function to direct message me. Okay, here is our friend from Argentina who lives in Miami. Unfortunately, she has fallen for an anti-vaccine talking point. Take a listen.
Hi, David. This is Anna, the Argentinian from Miami.
Right.
This is something that I'm worried about, and I don't hear anybody talking about. People who got vaccinated in December,
yes,
by June, may not be protected anymore because all they can guarantee is that the protection lasted at least 6 months. They suppose that maybe it will last more, but they don't know. And I don't hear about any plan of how to handle that.
So 2 parts. First of all, you have to understand something. When there was an announcement made that said immunity lasts for at least 6 months, what they meant was we've been following people for 6 months, and so far immunity hasn't declined. Then there was a 7th month, and it looks like it's now 7 months. What they mean by that is the vaccines being relatively new, all we can say is they work for the period of time that people that we've been putting in trials have been vaccinated. There is no reason to think that after 7 months or 8 months or 9 months, immunity will go down. The belief among epidemiologists and immunologists right now is that immunity against those original variants for which the original vaccines were tuned likely lasts at least years. Now, if the virus changes, then the efficacy will be diminished. But by the fall, Moderna and Pfizer are expecting to have boosters tuned to the variant. So when the headline came out, only 6 months of immunity, it was widely used by anti-vax people to say it only works for 6 months. No, what we know is it's been 6 months and there's no decline in immunity so far. And we'll look at it after 7, and we'll look at it after 8, and we'll look at it after 9. Okay, that's all that means. Nothing to be worried about for the time being. We have a great bonus show for you today. Get instant access to the bonus show by becoming a member at joinpakman.com.